From a child prodigy pianist starring opposite an uncooperative chimp to a future Walton family member trapped in television's worst sitcom, Me and the Chimp hides bizarre secrets that would haunt Hollywood legends. Discover the untold disasters, strange casting decisions, and career-crushing moments that made this 1972 disaster one of TV's most notorious failures. Fact 1. Ted Bessel was a Carnegie Hall prodigy. Before Ted Bessel became the frustrated dentist living with a troublemaking chimpanzee on one of television's most notorious failures, he was actually a legitimate classical music prodigy with an impressive musical pedigree. Born in Flushing, Queens in 1935, young Ted displayed extraordinary talent at the piano from an early age, quickly outpacing other children his age in both technical skill and musical interpretation. His abilities were so advanced that by the time he was just 12 years old in 1947, he performed a complete solo piano recital at Carnegie Hall, one of the most prestigious concert venues in the entire world. This wasn't a group performance or a student showcase where dozens of children played brief pieces, but rather a full recital where the child prodigy commanded the stage alone, demonstrating a level of musical maturity that most adult pianists never achieve. After this remarkable early success, Bessel initially seemed destined for a career as a classical musician, and his family fully expected him to pursue this path professionally. However, after attending Georgetown University and the University of Colorado, Bessel made the pivotal decision to abandon his promising music career entirely and focus on acting instead. He studied with the legendary acting teacher Sanford Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse in New York, completely reinventing himself as a performer. This career change eventually led him to his best-known role as Donald Hollinger, the patient boyfriend on the hit series That Girl with Marlo Thomas, which ran for 5 successful seasons from 1966 to 1971. Unfortunately, his very next starring role would be sharing the screen with an uncooperative primate in Me and the Chimp, a spectacular career misstep that earned him equal billing with a chimpanzee and widespread ridicule from critics and audiences alike. Fact 2. The star refused the original title. Ted Bessel may have agreed to star in a sitcom about a family adopting a chimpanzee, but he absolutely drew the line at grammatical errors in the show's title, leading to an unusual standoff before production even began. When producers first approached Bessel about the lead role, they presented the project with the working title, The Chimp and I, which immediately raised red flags for the classically educated actor who took pride in proper English usage. Bessel flatly refused to participate in the series unless the title was changed, arguing passionately that The Chimp and I was grammatically incorrect according to standard English rules. His objection was based on the grammatical principle that when listing yourself alongside others, proper etiquette and grammar dictate that you should place yourself last, making Me and the Chimp the correct construction rather than putting I at the end of the title. This might seem like an incredibly minor point to make a standover, especially for an actor who was about to spend months pretending a chimpanzee was a beloved family member. But Bessel felt strongly enough about the issue that he was willing to walk away from the role entirely. The producers, desperate to secure Bessel's involvement after his 5-year run on the popular series That Girl had made him a recognizable television star, ultimately capitulated to his demands and changed the title to Me and the Chimp before moving forward with production. In retrospect, the grammatical correction was probably the least of the show's problems, as fixing the title did absolutely nothing to improve the weak premise, poor scripts, or the numerous production difficulties that would plague the series throughout its brief 13-episode run on CBS. Fact 3. TV Guide named it 46 Worst Show Ever. 3 decades after Me and the Chimp limped through its single season and disappeared into television obscurity, the show received an official confirmation of its terrible reputation when TV Guide published a comprehensive ranking of television's biggest failures. In 2002, the influential television magazine compiled an extensive list titled The 50 Worst Shows of All Time, representing decades of television programming disasters, embarrassing misfires, and concepts that never should have made it past the pitch meeting. After careful consideration of thousands of series that had aired since the dawn of television, TV Guide placed Me and the Chimp at number 46 on this inglorious list, cementing its status as one of the most poorly received sitcoms in broadcast history. The show found itself in dubious company alongside other notorious failures like My Mother the Car, Cop Rock, and The Jerry Springer Show, all programs that have become punchlines in discussions about television's worst creative decisions. What makes this ranking particularly significant is that TV Guide wasn't simply looking at canceled shows or ratings failures, but specifically evaluating shows based on their overall quality, or rather, their spectacular lack thereof. The magazine's critics and editors considered factors like premise quality, execution, entertainment value, and cultural impact when compiling their list, and Me and the Chimp failed on virtually every measure they examined. This official recognition as one of television's worst shows came as no surprise to anyone who had actually watched the series during its original run, as critics had savaged it from the very beginning and audiences had stayed away in droves, leading to its swift cancellation after just a few months on the air. Fact 4. The future Elizabeth Walton started here. While Me and the Chimp represented a career low point for most of its participants, 6-year-old Kami Kotler managed to escape the wreckage and immediately land one of the most beloved roles in television history, making her the show's only real success story. Kotler played Kitty Reynolds, the young daughter in the chimp-obsessed Reynolds family, appearing in all 13 episodes of the doomed sitcom during the first few months of 1972. Despite her young age, Kotler delivered competent performances that stood out among the show's many problems, and industry professionals took notice of her natural screen presence and ability to hit her marks reliably. Almost immediately after Me and the Chimp was canceled in April of 1972, Kotler auditioned for and won the role of Elizabeth Walton, the youngest child in the Depression-era family at the center of The Waltons, which premiered in September of that same year. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for the young actress, as she went directly from one of television's most critically derided failures to one of its most acclaimed and beloved family dramas without any gap in her employment. While her former Chimp co-stars struggled to shake off the stigma of the failed sitcom, Kotler spent the next 9 years playing Elizabeth on The Waltons, appearing in over 200 episodes and becoming a cherished part of television history. She continued reprising the role in various Waltons reunion movies throughout the 1980s and 90s, forever cementing her place in television as part of the iconic Walton family. After leaving acting, Kotler pursued a completely different path, becoming an educator and eventually serving as co-director of the Ocean Charter School in California, proving that her early escape from Me and the Chimp set her on a much better trajectory than most people associated with that notorious production. Fact 5. The Chimp wore invisible black underwear. Behind the scenes of Me and the Chimp, the production dealt with an unusual wardrobe requirement that crew members found both bizarre and necessary, though viewers at home never knew it existed. According to people who worked on the show, the chimpanzee playing Buttons was required to wear black briefs during filming, a detail that sparked considerable discussion among the cast and crew about whether this odd clothing choice was motivated by concerns about television censorship standards or simply practical hygiene considerations. The 1970s were still a relatively conservative era for television broadcasting, with strict standards and practices departments at the networks carefully monitoring everything that appeared on screen. So it's entirely possible that CBS executives or nervous producers insisted on the undergarments to avoid any potentially awkward moments involving an undressed primate on a family sitcom. Alternatively, the decision might have been purely practical, as chimpanzees are not naturally house-trained animals, and working with an unclothed primate for hours on end during a television production could create significant sanitation challenges for the cast, crew, and set. What makes this detail particularly interesting is that despite the chimpanzee wearing these black briefs throughout the entire production, they were specifically chosen in black and carefully positioned so they would never be visible on camera, meaning the production went to considerable trouble to dress the animal in clothing that viewers would never actually see. The crew members who recalled this detail years later noted that they weren't entirely certain which concern, censorship, or hygiene had prompted the decision. But they remembered the black briefs as one of many strange aspects of working on a show that required treating a chimpanzee as a human actor and family member. Fact 6. The child star became an award-winning sound editor. While most child actors struggle to find success after their early roles, Scott Colden, who played son Scott Reynolds on Me and the Chimp, completely reinvented himself and achieved remarkable success in an entirely different corner of the entertainment industry. Colden appeared in all 13 episodes of the series as the young son who helps convince his reluctant father to keep Buttons the chimpanzee, and he continued acting in various television shows and Disney films throughout the 1970s, including a starring role in the Saturday morning series Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. However, after graduating from Phineas Banning High School in 1979, Colden made the decision to leave acting behind entirely, initially pursuing a career in music by playing in bands and eventually owning multiple recording studios in the Los Angeles area. In 1993, Colden transitioned into sound engineering and editing for film and television, discovering a natural aptitude for the technical and creative challenges of post-production sound work. Over the next 3 decades, he built an impressive resume with over 200 credits on major television series and films, including work on The X-Files, 24, Everybody Loves Raymond, and numerous Disney Channel shows like Hannah Montana and The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. His technical excellence earned industry recognition when he won the Golden Reel Award from the Motion Picture Sound Editors in 2000 for his work on the animated film Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, and just 4 years later in 2004, he received an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Sound Editing for the television movie 44 Minutes, The North Hollywood Shootout. Colden's successful second career proves that his brief time on Me and the Chimp was just the beginning of a much longer and more accomplished journey in entertainment. Fact 7. Gary Marshall joked he cast the wrong chimp. Years after, Me and the Chimp became one of the most embarrassing failures in his otherwise stellar television career, creator and producer Gary Marshall developed a humorous way of discussing the disaster that perfectly captured his self-deprecating personality and refusal to take himself too seriously. When asked about why the show had failed so spectacularly despite his involvement fresh off the success of The Odd Couple, Marshall would often deflect with a perfectly timed joke, claiming that the problem wasn't with the concept, the scripts, the cast, or any of the numerous other issues that plagued the production, but rather that he had simply cast the wrong chimp. This response was vintage Marshall humor, simultaneously acknowledging the show's failure while making light of it in a way that avoided throwing anyone else under the bus or making excuses about network interference, budget constraints, or any of the other factors that television creators typically blame when their projects don't succeed. The joke also cleverly played on the reality that casting the right lead can make or break any television series, but took that conventional wisdom to an absurd extreme by suggesting that the primate, not the human actors, had been the key miscalculation. Marshall's willingness to laugh at his own failures endeared him to colleagues throughout the industry and demonstrated the resilience that would serve him well as he moved forward to create some of television's most successful series, including Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and Mork and Mindy. The fact that Marshall could joke about Me and the Chimp rather than trying to bury it or pretend it never happened, showed a level of professional maturity that many creators never achieve. And his humorous perspective on the disaster likely helped others involved with the show feel less embarrassed about having it on their resumes. Fact 8. The Chimp was a difficult co-star. While Gary Marshall joked about casting the wrong chimpanzee, the reality behind the scenes was considerably less humorous, as the animal actor playing Buttons created constant problems that frustrated everyone involved in the production. According to Marshall himself, star Ted Bessel absolutely hated working with the chimpanzee, finding the entire experience of sharing scenes with the unpredictable primate to be professionally degrading and personally frustrating day after day on set. Marshall later revealed in interviews that the chimpanzee was extremely difficult to work with, refusing to cooperate with trainers, missing cues during crucial moments, and generally behaving in ways that made filming scenes far more complicated and time-consuming than anyone had anticipated when they greenlit the series. Chimpanzees, despite being intelligent animals, are notoriously challenging to work with in professional settings because they have strong personalities, short attention spans, and can become aggressive or uncooperative without warning, none of which translates well to the rigid scheduling demands of television production. The animals' difficult behavior meant that scenes had to be shot multiple times, production days ran longer than scheduled, and actors found themselves waiting around for extended periods while trainers attempted to coax the desired performance from their uncooperative co-star. For Bessel, who had spent 5 years as a respected television actor on That Girl working opposite the talented and professional Marlo Thomas, the experience of being upstaged and frustrated by a chimpanzee who couldn't even follow basic directions must have been particularly galling. The combination of Bessel's growing resentment toward his animal co-star and the production difficulties caused by the chimp's uncooperative nature created a toxic atmosphere on set that certainly didn't help the show's already weak scripts and problematic premise, contributing to the overall disaster that Me and the Chimp became. Fact 9. The Chimp was a space program washout. The premise of Me and the Chimp went beyond simply having a family adopt a stray chimpanzee, incorporating an elaborate backstory that attempted to give the series a unique angle, though this creative flourish did nothing to save the show from its fundamental problems. According to the show's concept, Buttons the chimpanzee wasn't just any ordinary primate who happened to wander into the Reynolds family's life, but was actually a failed candidate from the United States space program, having washed out of NASA's Animal Astronaut Training Program before somehow ending up loose in suburban California. This backstory tapped into the real history of NASA, using chimpanzees in the early space program during the 1960s, when animals were sent into space before human astronauts to test the safety and viability of space travel, making Ham, the astro chimp, a genuine American hero. However, the show's writers made the unusual choice not to reveal this crucial piece of information about Button's origins to the Reynolds family, or to the viewing audience, until several episodes into the series when an old Army sergeant character appeared and explained the chimp's secret past. The delayed revelation of Buttons being a space program washout suggests the writers were attempting to create an ongoing mystery or surprise twist for viewers. But in practice, this storytelling decision just made the premise even more confusing and implausible than it already was, raising questions about how a trained NASA chimpanzee ended up wandering around Los Angeles suburbs and why government officials weren't immediately searching for valuable government property. The space program backstory seems like an attempt to make the show feel more contemporary and connected to the era's fascination with space exploration, but ultimately it just added another layer of absurdity to a concept that was already struggling under the weight of its own silliness. Fact 10. Shooting the pilot was a hot, frustrating nightmare. The production difficulties that would plague Me and the Chimp throughout its brief run were apparent from the very beginning, as evidenced by a child extra's vivid memories of the hellish experience filming the pilot episode decades later. In a rare first-hand account posted online, someone who had worked as a child extra during the pilot production recalled being cast in a scene that was filmed at a miniature golf course somewhere in the Los Angeles area, a location shoot that quickly devolved into a frustrating ordeal for everyone involved. According to this extra's recollection, the filming took place on an extremely hot day, with cast and crew baking in the California sun while attempting to capture the necessary footage for the pilot episode. The heat alone would have made for an uncomfortable shooting experience, but the real problem came from the show's four-legged star, who proved completely uncooperative despite the best efforts of professional animal trainers. The production team spent hours trying unsuccessfully to get the chimpanzee to perform the actions required by the script, with take after take failing because the animal wouldn't hit its marks, wouldn't respond to cues, or simply refused to do what the trainers and director needed it to do. This child extra remembered feeling tremendous sympathy for the cast and crew as the long, hot shoot dragged on with no resolution in sight, everyone growing increasingly frustrated and exhausted, while the uncooperative chimpanzee remained the center of attention. The fact that even the pilot episode, which typically receives extra time, attention, and resources compared to regular series episodes, suffered from these severe production problems should have served as a warning sign that the entire concept was fundamentally flawed, but somehow the network moved forward anyway, greenlighting a full season of this troubled production despite the obvious challenges. Fact 11. The show ran for only 13 episodes. Despite various sources over the years reporting conflicting numbers about exactly how many episodes of Me and the Chimp were produced and aired, the official record confirms that the series ran for precisely 13 episodes during its brief time on CBS in early 1972. Some references have incorrectly cited 12 episodes, possibly confusing the episode count with other short-lived series or simply making an error in their research, while at least one source claimed the show produced 19 episodes, though no evidence exists to support this higher number, and it's unclear where that figure originated. The 13-episode run, which began with the premiere on Thursday, January 13, 1972, and concluded with the final episode on Thursday, April 27th of that same year, represents a relatively standard abbreviated season for a failing sitcom in that era of television. Networks in the early 1970s typically ordered 13 or 26-episode seasons for new shows, with 13 episodes representing a mid-season replacement schedule or a limited commitment that allowed networks to test a show without investing in a full season order. In the case of Me and the Chimp, CBS likely ordered 13 episodes as a trial run, probably hoping that the involvement of Gary Marshall and star Ted Bessel would attract audiences despite the unusual premise. However, the show's poor reception from both critics and viewers made it clear very quickly that no additional episodes would be ordered, and CBS chose not to renew the series for a second season, allowing it to quietly disappear from the schedule after just 4 months on the air. The brief 13-episode run means that Me and the Chimp never had the opportunity to find its audience or potentially improve with time, though given the fundamental problems with the concept and execution, additional episodes probably wouldn't have helped matters anyway. Fact 12. It was created between Marshall's biggest hits. The failure of Me and the Chimp becomes even more surprising when you consider the timing of its creation, falling right in the middle of what would become one of the most successful runs in television comedy history for creator Gary Marshall. Marshall had established himself as a major force in television by co-creating and executive producing The Odd Couple, which premiered in 1970 and became a critical favorite, even if it never dominated the ratings during its 5-season run from 1970 to 1975. Fresh off that success, Marshall developed Me and the Chimp in 1971, and it premiered in early 1972, right in the gap between his Odd Couple triumph and what would become his biggest hit of all, Happy Days, which debuted in January of 1974 and ran for 11 wildly successful seasons. This means Me and the Chimp represents a bizarre anomaly in Marshall's career trajectory, a spectacular misfire sandwiched between two beloved sitcoms that would define 1970s television comedy and establish Marshall as one of the most successful producers in the industry. After Happy Days became a phenomenon, Marshall leveraged that success to create a string of hit shows including Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, and Happy Days spin-offs, cementing his reputation as a comedy genius who understood American audiences. The fact that Marshall could stumble so badly with Me and the Chimp and then immediately recover with Happy Days demonstrates remarkable resilience and an ability to learn from failure, using the lessons from what didn't work to inform his future successes. Marshall's career ultimately proved that one disastrous failure doesn't define a creative person's legacy, and Me and the Chimp became nothing more than a footnote in his otherwise stellar resume. Fact 13. The co-creator later founded a TV empire. While Me and the Chimp represented an embarrassing failure for everyone involved, co-creator Thomas L. Miller managed to learn from the disaster and eventually built one of the most successful television production companies in history, proving that early failures can sometimes lead to much greater achievements. Miller had started his entertainment career working as an assistant to the legendary director Billy Wilder before moving into development executive positions at major studios like Paramount and 20th Century Fox, where he learned the business side of television production. In 1970, working with Edward K. Milkis, Miller co-created the family sitcom Nanny and the Professor, which enjoyed moderate success and gave him his first real taste of producing television comedy. The following year, Miller partnered with Gary Marshall to create Me and the Chimp, which bombed spectacularly and could have ended Miller's producing aspirations entirely if he had allowed the failure to define him. Instead, Miller regrouped and in 1972 founded Miller Milkis Productions with Edward Milkis, securing an exclusive production deal with Paramount Television that would change the trajectory of his career. Just 2 years later, their company bought the rights to Happy Days, which became a massive hit and launched an empire of successful sitcoms. Robert L. Boyett joined the company in 1979, creating Miller Milkis Boyett Productions, which eventually became Miller Boyett Productions and dominated family television for 2 decades. Under Miller's leadership, the company produced an astonishing string of hits, including Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, Bosom Buddies, Perfect Strangers, Full House, Family Matters, and Step by Step, shows that defined family television from the 1970s through the 1990s and created beloved characters that remain cultural touchstones today. Fact 14. A billing war may have killed the show. Beyond all the production problems, weak scripts, and audience indifference that plagued Me and the Chimp, some crew members believe the show's cancellation was hastened by an ego battle between the human star and his primate co-star over whose name would appear first in the opening credits. According to reports from people who worked on the series, Ted Bessel became increasingly frustrated not just with the difficulties of working with the chimpanzee, but also with the fact that the show's title and some promotional materials seemed to give equal or even greater importance to the animal, rather than treating Bessel as the clear star of the series. Bessel, who had spent 5 years as a respected television actor on That Girl and expected his next starring role to elevate his career further, instead found himself literally sharing billing with a chimpanzee who couldn't even remember its marks from one take to the next. The tension came to a head when Bessel apparently demanded top billing over the chimpanzee, insisting that the credits and promotional materials make it clear that he was the star of the show and the animal was merely a supporting player or prop. This demand put the producers and network in an awkward position, since the entire premise of the show revolved around the chimpanzee and its antics, making it difficult to argue that the animal wasn't central to the series' identity. According to crew reports, CBS executives viewed Bessel's demands as the final straw for a show that was already failing in the ratings and receiving terrible reviews, and they pulled the plug on the series rather than deal with an ego battle between a frustrated actor and a chimpanzee who obviously had no opinion on billing matters, ending the show's run after just 13 episodes. Fact 15. The Chimp had professional trainers. Despite all the production difficulties and the chimpanzee's reputation as a difficult and uncooperative performer, the animal playing buttons was actually under the care of experienced professionals who specialized in training animals for film and television work. The chimpanzee was owned by Lou Schumacher, a veteran animal expert who had spent years working with various animals in the entertainment industry and understood the unique challenges of preparing animals for the demands of television production. Schumacher had built a reputation for providing well-trained animals to productions and knew how to work with chimpanzees, which are among the most intelligent but also most unpredictable animals used in Hollywood. The actual training work for Me and the Chimp was handled by Bob Rydell, who was specifically responsible for teaching the chimpanzee to perform all the acting tasks required by the scripts, working tirelessly to get the animal to respond reliably to various hand signals and voice commands that would cue specific behaviors during filming. This training process was far more complex than most viewers probably realized, as the chimp needed to hit marks, interact with props, respond to other actors, and perform sequences of actions that appeared natural and spontaneous but actually required extensive rehearsal and reinforcement. The fact that even with two experienced professionals handling the animal, the chimpanzee still proved extremely difficult to work with and frequently failed to perform as needed demonstrates just how challenging it is to use chimpanzees as actors, regardless of how much training and preparation goes into the process. Schumacher and Riedel did their best with the tools and techniques available in the early 1970s, but ultimately, even professional animal handlers couldn't overcome the fundamental problem of trying to make a chimpanzee into a reliable sitcom. Television performer, television performer, television performer, television performer.